Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sophia, and I'm going to be your host today with my colleague Lauren, who you will find in the chat and in the background of today's session. As you know, this is the second event now that we're going to do in the Scrum series, and Lothar and Regina are going to tell you everything about the Daily Scrum that you need to know today. Please also remember to ask them a lot of good questions in the Q&A. We will have a look at the questions a little bit later in the session today. The recording will also be shared through our social media platforms. So if you or somebody you know would like to then look at the recording again or share it with your network, that's going to be perfectly fine. We are also going to do some polling where we want you to answer a few questions so that we get to know who you are. But before we start with the polls, I'm going to hand over to Regina and Lothar so that they can present themselves a little bit more to you. We are also available in the chat with Lauren throughout the presentation, so feel free to chat with us. But remember to put the questions in the Q&A for later. I'm going to hand it over to you guys now to give a short presentation. Maybe Regina, you can go first, and then we'll do the polls after that.
Thanks, Fia. My name is Regina and I am based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm in the South African team, and I spend a lot of my days doing training and coaching as well. And the Daily Scrum, well, it's one of the sessions that I want to help people save and so that they can have awesome ones.
Yeah, hello, good morning from my side. My name is Lothar. I am part of the German team, actually located in Vienna, Austria. Looking forward to this webinar of Daily Scrums. I think this is one of the events that keep us busy all day long, or one of the events that is very important to us, as it happens even every day and it influences our daily work. Looking forward to the question that you guys having regarding this event, and let's see how we can share knowledge and what is going on with your daily scrums during today's session.
Super. Thank you guys for the presentation. And now, guys, for you listening, it's time for the first poll. So we would also like to get to know you a little bit. As usual, we would like to know what is your role. So please have a look at the poll and you can start answering it already now. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. So we kind of focus on who is here and what kind of questions we might get from the audience today. I see a lot of you are already answering. So far, the majority of the listeners are Scrum Masters, but there are also Agile coaches in the room, leadership management roles in the room, and product owners, and also team members or developers. So the ones who are answering others, please also put in the chat maybe a comment if you want to, what your role is. But this looks good so far. We almost have responses now from everyone, so I'm just going to end the poll here and share the results with everyone so that you can see. Also, Lothar and Regina, you will see that the Scrum Masters are the biggest majority in the room today. And we also have another poll for you regarding the daily scrums. So we are a little bit interested in what problems you might have with the daily scrums. We already finalized a few answers, so you can click on these choices, but also if you have something else that you feel is difficult with your daily scrums, please also feel free to share with us in the chat about this. Here the variety is a little bit bigger of what the challenges are so far. Little or no focus on the sprint goal is getting quite a lot of attention here, or that individuals take time to talk about their own items. Also, some see that the dailies are taking quite long, or that they also struggle to focus during the sprint. So those are kind of now the majority here that people are voting for. I think I'm also now going to end the poll here because we got a quite good picture, and I'm also sharing with you all now the results. So as you can see, little or no focus on the sprint goal got most attentions here. And then also talking about own items or taking too long or struggle to focus is also among the popular answers here. Thank you very much, guys, for being active already at this point. This will help both Regina and Lothar to focus a little bit today in their talk. I'm going to jump off also and come back when we look at your questions. So it's already fine to put questions in the Q&A, and we will have a look at them a little bit later. Over to you guys.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. So Lothar, let me share my screen. Great, and let me just.
Yeah, just seen that there are already the first questions in the chat. We will address them during the next couple of minutes. Regina and I prepared a little bit about like, okay, how is the daily Scrum embedded in the rest of the sprint, or why do we think that it is important? And we started with the idea of talking about like, what is the sprint about in general? And in theory, like, you know, there is the sprint planning where you say, okay, well, what would we like to achieve during the next couple of weeks? And there is a dedicated goal that we would like to achieve. And at the beginning of the sprint planning, that sounds as a quite straightforward thing. You know, there is the sprint planning, here's the goal, there we go. And what happens in practice quite often is that we're finding out, okay, well, that was not such a straightforward thing, but we will need to adjust the way how we're going on the way. And as you already mentioned in the poll, the sprint goal is quite an important thing. And we as a team may think about, well, if we are trying to follow up this joint goal altogether, and we're finding out that we're not going in the direction we intended to, then we can use the Daily Scrum as an event where we think about like, okay, how to adjust, how can we as a team adjust and adapt so that we're going back to our goal, or maybe we find out that we're not able to reach our goal and we have to redefine the target of the sprint. The other thing that we're seeing quite often as, let's call it the worst case, is that at the end of the sprint, we realize, oh, Jesus Christ, there was our goal and we just passed by. We have not been able to meet it, and we're realizing it quite late or even too late after the sprint. And then like everybody's getting, yeah, well, you see the emojis over there. And this is a good indicator for us that we would say, okay, well, actually, I think like the synchronization within the sprint has not been working out that well. If we only realize afterwards that we have not been able to reach our goal. And this is what definitely should not happen. And if this is something that sounds familiar to you, then I think like you're here in the right place in a webinar talking about the Daily Scrum. And with this, I would like to hand over to Regina, who will talk about a little bit about the purpose of the daily.
Thanks, Lothar. So moving over to this particular slide. So the purpose of the Daily Scrum is for the team of developers to collectively plan the day. And reflecting on the poll and the results that it showed that the majority of you have problems with not focusing on the sprint goal. And then individuals are talking about their own work, which means that there is a lack of focus on the team and that it also takes too long. All of those are actually connected, they're linked. And it's because there is a lack of focus on the sprint goal. As Lothar mentioned before, there might not be a sprint goal or there is drifting from what the sprint goal. So the purpose of the Daily Scrum is purely for the team of developers to come together once a day to collectively plan their day and ask themselves, so what or do we need to do in order to still be on track to meet the sprint goal? That's all it is, right? That's all it is. It's not about individuals talking about what they did, because sometimes what individuals did yesterday may not be irrelevant today towards meeting the sprint goal. So if you focus on the sprint goal, very important, you are on the right track. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the Daily Scrum is not a status meeting. And the differences between one and the other is the Daily Scrum has a focus on the sprint goal. Status meetings are meetings which are normally called by management who want to know exactly what's going on, and management has an agenda, and they also want to know not only progress, but they want to know financials, risks, etc., etc., etc. The focus there is not on the sprint goal. The focus there is on what management wants to hear. Status meetings typically take a long time. They can happen once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month. There's minutes and there's agendas and things like that. Whereas the Daily Scrum is a meeting by the developers for the developers to ensure that they are still on track in order to meet the sprint goal, to collectively plan their day, to ensure that they are still on track towards the sprint goal. And I'm repeating myself quite a bit, or rather the word sprint goal, because that is so important. When I speak and coach teams in organizations, a lot of them do not have a sprint goal. So there are certain anti-patterns creeping into their sprint planning process, which is manifesting in the fact that they are not working towards a sprint goal. Having said that and emphasized that, I'm going to hand back to Lothar to take us through the next part.
Yeah, there are some things or some frame conditions that we should share when we talk about the Daily Scrum. The most important thing, it is a time-boxed meeting and an agreed time box where everybody from the team should be able to participate. It's fixed, and we always talk about these 15 minutes, who is the maximum of time that we would like to spend for it, because this is what we think, or what shows practice, that a team in the right size should take to synchronize on the things that they are doing during the day to focus on their sprint goal. So 15 minutes is this magical number where you say, okay, well, if we make it in 15 minutes max, we're doing quite well. If you would repeatedly say, okay, well, we extend these 15 minutes, then you may be one of these people who just answered in the poll, our dailies take too long. How comes? What's the benefits of this kind of time boxing, or why do we do it? It allows us to focus on the things that are important for the team regarding achieving the sprint goal. And we would also see, well, if we're seriously need to talk longer than 15 minutes, then maybe we're not focusing, or we're going too deep into detail, these kind of topics. It should be just enough time to talk about the things that are important when it comes to our daily work, like 15 minutes a day. This is quite okay. And this kind of focus helps us to prioritize the things that are really important for teams exchange. So it prevents us about like talking about everything and going into too many details, which are not necessarily interesting for the entire team. These 15 minutes are used to exchange on the things that are going on in the team. There are some artifacts that teams would use to facilitate this kind of meeting. I think the most important one is the task board. We use it to get some transparency on like, what are the things that are in progress? Are there any things which are impeded? Are there any things that we are seriously working longer on than we actually thought that we're doing? So the Daily Scrum may be a good point to address also impediments that come up. And I think this is a quite good bridge to one of the other questions that came in the chat, like how is it with these 3 questions, because the third question is the question about the impediments always. We had the discussion yesterday in our in preparation of this webinar, and also in the German team, like, do we have to use these 3 questions, or are there other questions possible as well? But that's already talking about good and bad practices that we may use. And saying that, I would like to hand over to Regina. What's your opinion on the 3 questions?
Yeah, thanks, Lothar. So I'm sure all of you are aware that the Scrum Guide was updated and a new version was published in 2020, and that the new version of the Scrum Guide has actually removed the 3 questions from the section. So it's no longer part of the Scrum theory. It has been replaced with a sentence that talks to the team decides how they're going to structure the daily Scrum. And that's quite important because it leads us to encouraging teams to be self-managing. They decide how they are going to run their own meeting, because after all, the daily Scrum is the team of developers' own meeting. So they decide what questions to ask or what structure to have for the daily Scrum within the constraints which Lothar mentioned, the 15 minutes daily, the agreed fixed time box. And a lot of teams are still using the 3 questions, and that's perfectly okay, right? It's the team decides the 3 questions are working for them, they can use the 3 questions. In fact, when I start coaching very new teams that are just starting off with the Scrum and the daily Scrum, something new to them, I say, look, we can use any structure, but let's start using these 3 questions just so you can get used to the idea of what the daily Scrum is about, with the focus on the sprint goal. So if you're using the 3 questions, if it's working for you, totally continue, right? As long as it's working for the developers. Personally, with teams that I have been a Scrum Master at, is sometimes the 3 questions get a little bit too monotonous. And it doesn't bring about new thinking, right? New ideas in order to meet the sprint goal. And Scrum Masters, I know there's a lot of you here, you are observing the team all the time, and you are seeing that the team is having a problem, therefore let's try a different way of structuring the daily Scrum, and you can suggest it to the team. Of course, knowing that you as a Scrum Master, you do not have to facilitate the daily Scrum. You're actually optional to the daily Scrum. But you can add a lot of value to teams that might be spinning. So some practices that I find work quite well. I get a lot of questions where people say, well, our daily Scrum takes too long because each person goes one at a time, focus on the individuals, and then we go over time. And I say, well, one way of trying to break the ice as such, to prevent it from being something which is done in a sequence, is to use a talking ball. It's a very old idea. You're probably all aware of the talking ball. And in one of my teams, we actually had a talking zebra. It was a stuffed toy. We brought some fun into the daily Scrum. We had a stuffed toy, and the stuffed toy was passed by the developers amongst themselves. And it wasn't done in a sequence. It was done in a logical order, focusing on the sprint goal. And it's not about each individual talking about what they did. It's about, this is this item, this is what we accomplished yesterday to meet the goal, this is what we need to do today. And you might have more than one person talking to a particular item and not one person only. So doing it in that way keeps the interest going and makes it a lot of fun. So another practice is work backwards from the sprint goal. So instead of, we are hardwired to start from the beginning, from left to right, right? And we like working in sequence, but break that. Instead of doing it in sequence, start at the end, start with the sprint goal, right? Start at the, what do you want to achieve by the end of the sprint, and then work backwards and see what is still relevant and what needs to be done or changed in order to keep that sprint goal in mind. Another thing that I want to mention is that the team, I like to encourage teams. So when I'm coaching, I like to encourage teams to think about themselves as a team rather than individuals. And one of the ways of doing it is to, each person ends off, or each group of people ends off what they are saying by asking, so I have some time today, how can I help someone? How can I help this person or that person keep focus on the sprint goal. So how can I help? And it doesn't have to be a subject matter expert or somebody who knows that particular part of the code base. Help comes in many forms. So encourage teams to help each other. And help comes in many forms. It could be pairing with someone. It could be looking over and checking test cases. Does it make sense? It could be helping the business analysts doing some analysis, or it could be anything. So remember, if you're encouraging the team members to help each other, know that help comes in many different forms, and get people to think along those lines. What else did I want to mention? Oh, that's it. That's all I wanted to mention in terms of good practices. And you're probably going to have like a whole bunch of questions, which then Lothar and I can share more good practices. But those are just some great practices to focus on. Oh, one more thing. Lothar has alluded to, and it also talks to, the Daily Scrum is too long. Daily Scrum is not a problem-solving meeting. Okay, if you're solving problems in the Daily Scrum, that's probably one of the reasons why it's taking too long. So I just wanted to put that out there. Daily Scrum is not a problem-solving meeting. It needs to happen after the Daily Scrum. Cool.
Into the chat, and I think like the idea of tossing the ball or tossing the zebra is quite popular at our guests. So the question that they're having is, how can we handle that in remote situations? Just speaking out of the German team, how do we handle that? We're doing our daily every day in the morning, and someone starts, whoever feels comfortable. And of course, we have our daily at 9 o'clock in the morning. The first thing that we're having is always this kind of social thingy, because some of us log in a little bit earlier and you chit chat, Regina, what happened since yesterday, or this kind of stuff, and it happens. And normally, a few minutes after 9, to be very honest, we start. Someone starts and says, okay, well, by the way, these are my points. And then you would point out the next person and just say, I tossed the ball to Fia, or I tossed the ball to Emily. And this is how we keep it virtually. Like, no, there is no ball. In some situations, I remember Simon this morning, he was sitting in like that this morning, saying, by the way, I haven't had the ball yet. So they were waiting to catch it. But basically what we would do is we just like say, I tossed the ball to, that fulfills the daily and virtual purposes. The other question that came up that I would like to bring up is good practices for how to handle the daily remotely. We just have been talking about like the 3 questions, yes or not. Is this a good practice or is this not a good practice? Some people, some teams like it, some people or some teams would rather start from a sprint goal perspective and talk about the sprint goal. At the end of the day, these kind of practices are something that have to work for your team and have to work in your environment. And I have personally seen some, teams or been part of discussions like, should we do one question after the other or go one person by one person? And these are typical discussions that you would face in teams. And at the end of the sprint, you would realize, no matter if you do it this way or if you do it that way, by the way, we have been able to not meet our sprint goal. And if you find yourself in these kind of situations, then you have taken a good practice, but applied it in the wrong way. Because either if you do it this way or that way, as long as like when you miss the sprint goal, it was not working in the way it should. So I think it's an individual team's thing that they should discover what works well for them. Either if you apply the practice this way and go person by person, or if you apply it question by question, or if you use any kind of other approach that Regina just shared with us. But the quality of a good daily scrum would always be, have we been able to meet our sprint goal at the end of the sprint? Have we been able to adjust if there were any changes in the sprint? Have we been able to synchronize as a team to reach a joint goal as a team? Not saying Regina is meeting her goal and Lothar is meeting his goal, and we have been able to synchronize only that few that it was not, boring or anything, but have we been able to work together, contribute together, exchange as much as was needed to do this thing that we wanted to achieve as a team together? And that's the reason why we spend 15 minutes of our day to align and synchronize on that. And if you're able to make that, then, or if you're able to say at the end of the sprint, we have been able to align on it, then you will realize, okay, we had a good daily scrum. And if you are not able to meet your sprint goal or react to any kind of changes that may occur during the sprint, then you will as well figure out, okay, well, maybe we should have done something different in our dailies or in the touch points that we had in between. This is how I would determine if the daily was successful or not.
Can I ask a question from the audience also here in between when we're talking now about the timing of the daily? So what if the daily is shorter? I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to say that everyone in the daily has to speak for a certain amount of minutes just to use the 15 minutes, right? So is it okay also if you cut it short, or what do you think about this?
Yeah, the time box, it's a maximum unit of time. So 15 minutes is dedicated. If it's done in 10 minutes, then it's done in 10 minutes, and that's fantastic. So it's totally okay.
Practical answer, if you're just like coming out of your sprint planning and you're having a quick daily, I imagine that the daily will be a little bit shorter. If you're doing your daily at Friday at 9 o'clock and your review is at Friday 11, I would also imagine that things are shorter because there should not be too much adjustment towards how do we meet the sprint goal. So in practice, of course, this diverges. And it can be that we're having at any point in time, we're having a daily which takes 20 minutes, but it's good discussion. It's relevant for the entire team. Everybody says, okay, well, that was necessary. But in general, 15 minutes is the time that you should hit. If it's shorter or if you're faster because everything's clear, there have not been too many changes, then there you go.
Is there a way then to teach people not to go too much into detail so that it would take longer?
I remember a team I was working with, they were in Berlin, and they had this card, and the card was Elmo with Elmo from the Sesame Street. I don't know if you call him in English like that. And the Elmo card was lying in the middle of the table, and whenever anybody started to talk out widely, everybody was able to grab to the middle of the table and put the Elmo card, which was a little bit like something between like childish and offensive, but the team liked it. But this was a quite nice thing, just like sitting around like yellow card, and when you, this is now stop.
Okay.
Yeah, and I like that because it's signals, it's signs which the team figure out for themselves, which allow them to hold each other accountable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Regarding the audience, there is another question I'm quite interested in, in your opinion, Regina. I'm wondering, we just said that the Daily Scrum is a meeting for the developers to synchronize towards the sprint goals. Now, looking to our panelists, only 7% of the people in here are developers, but there are a lot of people in here who say they have a management position. So I'm wondering, like, why is this Daily Scrum so important to people in management positions? Maybe we could answer or tackle this question here as well.
Yeah. So a lot of people in management positions, like project managers, they want to use the Daily Scrum as to get a status update, right? And well, my answer to that is, understand that the Daily Scrum is by the developers for the developers or team of developers, and that if you keep that in mind and you respect that, there's nothing wrong with just being at the back of the room, observing and listening, right? Observing, listening. And that if you have any questions, then you wait for the Daily Scrum to be officially closed. So, you know, I used to do this. I used to say, okay, Daily Scrum is now officially closed. I used to close the space, and then I used to open it to anybody else that had an interest. And then only the people that needed to be there stayed, and the rest went back to work. So if you're handling it like that, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's very much it's not what the Scrum Guide says, but it's, you know, it's like more of a coaching approach. Close the space, and then if you have anything to ask, do it after the Daily Scrum. Yeah.
Maybe two other thoughts from my side. What I think which is quite helpful, our daily is of course if the daily is from 9 to 9:15, you know that you will meet these people. If you have any question, you will meet these people most probably like over there, and you will not disturb them during any kind of working task or when they are working on any kind of focus topic, because you know like 9:15 everybody is quite free. So people have not started to go, like, let's say, for example, for software developers, there is like 90 minutes of concentration period. If you disturb them just like right in the middle of this concentration period, then they may be a little bit annoyed. You know, like 9:15, this is for us just the time where everybody would go from the daily, go to the coffee machine, grab their next coffee. So you know, here all people are together, all people are available. So that's a good touch point to meet your team for any kind of other questions. If there is anything you would like to share. Fia, by the way, we need to talk about this one client project we have been talking last week. 9:15, good point in time to hang out or to reach out, because I know that you're available around that time and not into something super specific or super deep into any kind of other topic. That's the one thing. The other thing that is, from my perspective, quite important, what you could realize in some kind of, although what you often see in teams is they're going to the review, and at the day of the review, there is this, by the way, guys, we just like missed our sprint goal. Just wanted to inform you beforehand. Like in the last possible time, it's like a, sorry, mom and dad, I have not cleaned up my room. Yeah, well, and I think this is counterproductive, because this does not go together, or it will not raise trust between team and management, or team and leadership, or whoever you would like to call it. So at the end of the day, the daily Scrum is a good touch point to see from senior management, like, are we on track? Does the team need any kind of support? Not in sense of giving me a status update, but if you as a team are able to address any kind of issues, or if management got like this intention of, okay, these guys are able to work on issues they're having and they will raise their hand right in time, then this may be a good position where they can say, okay, well, I'm available, you know, like in the second row, in the third row, whenever you get any kind of questions, I'm available to you. And they will not have this kind of need to disrupt the meeting or to get any kind of status update, because management gets the feeling of, okay, guys, I feel like you know what you're doing. And if there is anything like 9:15 or whenever, then I'm quite open to help you if there are any requests, if there is any kind of support, you just synchronized, then it's super helpful to have management in here. As Regina said, from the very back of the room.
There's another question in the Q&A, which is, what's the difference between the daily Scrum in Scrum and the Kanban daily? And interestingly enough, the concept of the daily meeting predates Scrum. It's many decades old, so it's nothing new. A lot of you probably know it as the daily stand-up. So in Kanban, there are feedback loops, there are daily feedback loops. And a lot of teams using Kanban will do a daily Scrum or a daily stand-up. There is no difference, right? The only not difference, but the only thing that in theory, the daily Scrum is embedded, part of the framework, explicitly part of the framework. Whereas in Kanban doesn't dictate that it's got to be like called a daily Scrum, right? There is a feedback loop that needs to happen on a daily basis. And if you are doing Kanban and you're using the same format as the daily Scrum, that's perfectly okay. Completely okay. It's fulfilling the purpose, right? And I think that is, it's less about, are we doing it right? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? But okay, are we focusing on what we need to focus? And are we successful? Are we focusing on the outcomes, whether you're scrumming or Kanbaning?
Okay. There are more and more questions coming up. There was one quite interesting one. We have two teams. Nearly all team members think that meeting daily is too much, and they agreed on 2 days, or like doing a bi-daily, or whoever you would call it. What should the Scrum Master do? Let things as they are, because teams agreed that they would like to introduce it that way, or does it have to be daily? It is called daily, so you should definitely do it daily. No, I think like there is the good sentence saying like, ask the team if they think that they would like to try something out or they would like to adjust this practice. Fair enough. Let's go for it. And this is one of the reasons why we are using sprints. Like we can try this for 1 sprint or 2 sprints to see how does this work for us. Maybe your environment is not in so much change that you don't need to do that. Or the team is sitting in an on-site setting very close by and they have any kind of communication, like when people need to talk to each other, they just look over there and talk to each other. So that's working for them as well. At the end of the day, Regina just introduced the purpose of the meeting. We would like to align on align on how to reach a joint goal together. And if they are adjusting one of the good practices that we're using in Scrum teams, which is 15-minute synchronization with all developers to align on the sprint goal, if they're able to find a way of fulfilling this purpose without meeting them daily, then fair enough, there they go. But at the end of the day, if the team is trying something out and they're not able to work on a joint goal, then we have also to challenge them and say, okay, well, do you think it was helpful to adjust that certain practice if on the other hand, you have not been able to fulfill the purpose or meeting your goal? How does this work together?
There's another question, and my tendency is to go for the easy questions first, so I'm going to go for a hard one. It's our team works on different products and work items for these products and will be pulled into a sprint. Can we have a sprint goal for different products in a sprint? So this question has got many different layers, right? So it's got the layers about different products, okay. And the other layer is about, you know, should you have different sprint goals? So, and there may be other layers, but let me just deal with these two, and then maybe Lothar has something to add. So when we're talking about Scrum teams, we are talking about Scrum teams focusing on a product, right? They're product teams, and they normally focus on one product, and the sprint goal is related to their product. Now you're talking about, so that's the first layer, right? It's the theory. And I was actually a Scrum Master for a team that was working on more than one product. Actually, it was just because it was in the domain of this team. It was focusing on a particular business area in one of the banks, and it was different products, right? But they never worked on more than 2 of those products at any one time. Because, you know, products eventually die, but, you know, products, you know, just they live, they have longevity. Which leads me to what I want to say is like writing a sprint goal, coming up with a sprint goal. And there's the art and there's the science of that. The science, of course, is knowing what is, you know, what do your stakeholders expect? What is the expectation of the product owner? You know, what knowledge do you have about that as a team? And also then writing the sprint goal. I've seen a lot of teams write sprint goals, and the sprint goal is like in the sprint, and then it's a series of bullet points. We are going to develop this story. We're going to develop this story. That's not a sprint goal, right? If your sprint goals look like that, that's not a sprint goal, okay? You need to focus a little bit higher and think about what is the outcome at the end of the sprint, okay? What are we achieving as a team? And what are we achieving that is also going to meet our stakeholders' expectations? So you need to think about the goals. You need to think about outcomes, not outputs. So if you have a bullet point in your sprint goal that's saying we're going to develop this functionality and that functionality and that functionality, those are outputs. That doesn't belong in a sprint goal. Okay, you need to think about outcomes. What is the, you know, those are, what is the expected or intended result that those outputs are going to generate for the business stakeholders, and then think about it in those terms. And the best sprint goals are ones which are clear, concise, as in not one page, right? Clear, concise, should be ideally written on a card. It's up on the board or in Jira or wherever you work. And if you ask any developer, what is the sprint goal, they can say it from the top of their heads, right? So all I can say in that context is think about what is the outcome, what is the consequence or the intention of delivering these outputs for your business stakeholders. That's your outcome. That is what your sprint goal is.
Thank you. There is also another question that I find quite interesting. In today's remote world, we know that people might need an extra social input. So they might also use the daily to socialize if they don't meet their team members any other time. So how can you deal with the social needs in a fully remote team when it comes also to the dailies or the other Scrum events, that the social part isn't taking over the event?
Interesting one. Technically, or from a technical perspective, the daily has to fulfill another purpose than socializing with the team members, but we do understand that this happens. So how do I perceive it as being part of a fully remote team? And I don't see my colleagues too often, unfortunately. As mentioned, what we're having is like our team daily starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it can be that if you're having a good time, you're just joining our daily call a little earlier, and you start socializing a little bit earlier. What we had yesterday, day before yesterday, was one of the colleagues said, "Well, I'm not super busy today, so I know there was like Simon, and there are some. I haven't seen him for a while. You know, I just returned from holiday. I haven't seen Simon for a while. It's a couple of things to talk. And when Simon says he's not so super busy today." Then of course I'm gonna give him a call and say, "Hey, should we have a coffee today?" So within the daily, we would clarify, by the way, would you like to go for a coffee? And we arrange these kind of small social meetings and these social one-on-ones that have to happen. We will arrange that in the daily, because you get like basically like, are people super busy? Are people super stressed or super underwater? Do they need support? Or if there's someone saying, okay, by the way, I have some slack, I can offer support, you would also get the sensing of, by the way, today maybe like some time for socializing. And yes, of course, we know that we need this kind of social glue. There are some jokes going on in our team daily every day, and I think this is also quite helpful for the social part to have like this kind of stuff. But technically, the daily is not the daily is not a socializing meeting, or not. That's not the main purpose of the daily when we come to the strict definition. Let's say so.
Okay. I see there's another question about what happens when a team has a lot of support or maintenance tickets, which is effectively not part of the sprint goals. And that is always tricky, and it could be multi-layered, and that is, yeah, it could be multi-layered as well. So yeah, your team is dealing with support tickets, they deal with support tickets, right? It's not a part of the sprint goal, or rather it's not part of the, well, it is part of the sprint goal. If you think about the sprint goal is what is the business going to be able to do as a result of us doing this work? All right. And fixing production issues means that your business is going to be up and be able to deliver services to their customers. And those support tickets that are coming in, and that is unplanned work, right? Which I hope you make sure you have a buffer in your sprint backlog to deal with those things, is to include in your sprint goal. We also endeavor to help our business stay afloat or stay up, etc. And everybody knows that when we get support issues, maintenance issues, they're going to come in, we're going to have to deal with them, in addition to all the other new and sexy stuff that we are going to be doing. So it may not be explicitly part of the sprint goal, but it is implied that you are doing everything you can in order to help the business, your stakeholders, your customers, do what they need to do, achieve what they need to achieve through your work, right? Because your work leads directly to something which business customers can do, can achieve. You are helping them achieve their goals, and fixing production issues and doing maintenance tickets helps them achieve their goals. It may be an intangible thing, it may be something which you may not be directly related, but at the end of the day, if those production issues are not dealt with, it means that your business customers are not going to be able to achieve their goals. So that's what I say to that question. I don't know if you have anything to add, Lothar.
Yeah, I would like to combine it with the question that some people brought up, saying, okay, well, they also have some operational work to do, how to handle that. And what happens if there are any tickets from operations coming, and should the Scrum Master support the peer product owner in prioritizing that? As mentioned, like the end of the daily, or the daily, is a very good point where you're bringing together all the team members and you're collectively planning your day. So this is also where operational tickets may come in if you're a DevOps team, and where we can discuss how to handle these kind of things. The very important aspect is how to do priority on these kind of things. Good practice is that we have a gut feeling. How much development do you have? How much operations do we have? And if we say, okay, well, we have around about 50% operations, then we should reserve 50% of our time for what tickets are there from the operational side, which critical things are coming in that need to be handled due to criticality, due to any kind of service level agreement, these kind of stuff. So yes, this can happen here as well. Two things that I would like to share regarding the nature of the questions. Please prioritize these kind of things before the daily. Don't say, okay, by the way, let's have a look into our inbox. Are there any critical tickets? So maybe the one or the other colleague may already have a look on it and say, okay, by the way, regarding to our criticality levels or severity levels that we have defined, there are 3 tickets that need to be solved within a service level of 24 hours. So we should tackle 1, 2, 3 things first. I personally don't care if it's the product owner doing this or a development team member. I'm working with a team who have like the dev of the day, who is responsible for these kind of operational requests and who would come typically in the daily and say, by the way, as a dev of the day, I had a look into our inbox. These are the tickets that need to be done today. Whoever has time will pull them. Should the Scrum Master do it? Well, if you need any kind of support on how could prioritization techniques look like, or what should we take care of when we talk about like severity levels, this is something where a Scrum Master can support the discussion. They may share back good practices. They may go into a discussion like how should our service levels look like, or why is it not the best idea if everything is high priority and goes in the sprint? What are the things that could wait a little longer? We should have a discussion about this. But to be very honest, I think I'm able to do quite good interim Scrum Master, but you don't want me to make the prioritization of your tickets in your company. And from the same perspective, I think that it should not be the Scrum Master who is doing the prioritization of tickets. If there is a product owner who understands the business side and there are developers who understand the technical side, the Scrum Master is the last person who should say, okay, well, let's have a look at the bunch of tickets. This is maybe prior 1 and this is maybe prior 5. There are other people who know that seriously better.
Okay. Somebody's asking, what role should the task board play? And the task board is it's the visualization of the work of the team, of the work that the team is doing in order to reach that sprint goal. It's part of creating that transparency. In the Daily Scrum, every single member of the team of developers has a responsibility towards making their work transparent, and having that visualization is part of that. It's part of transparency and visualizing the work of the team. Before COVID, we had whiteboards or walls or glass or whatever the case was. It was easy to get that full picture view of a sprint. And then now, of course, there are other tools, which is Jira or Trello, or, there's a lot of you are using very different tools. And it's very important that everyone is aware of, what is actually in our sprint backlog, because that task board visualizes your sprint backlog, visualizes the items, it visualizes the tasks, and you can visualize your sprint goal, and you can also visualize your blockers or impediments. And it provides a guidance, right? It's not like a script. It's not like item 1, item 2, item 3, and you go through every single item. It's not a script. It's actually, it guides the conversation, because like everything about a Scrum, the conversation, the communication, the meeting of minds is more important than actually physically writing things down, right? You can do that afterwards. Of course, you need to update things. You can do that afterwards. So it guides the conversation and ensures that there's transparency. And for me, it's the empirical process control, the 3 pillars are very important. If you keep that in mind, if you allow that to inform how you operate using Scrum, you're going to do the right things. You're going to do the right actions to ensure that the team the work of the team is transparent, which allows inspection and adaptation. Because without transparency, you cannot inspect and adapt adequately, if at all. Right, you need that transparency first, which allows the inspection and adaptation. So in my view, it's important to guide the conversation.
Piggybacking on the question with the task board, I would like to kill 2 other birds with 1 stone. There is a quite interesting question, like, do you know where in history the misunderstanding comes from that the Daily Scrum is about solving problems or reporting problems? This comes from the 3 questions of the daily that were quite popular and were in the Scrum Guide for quite long, because the 3rd question was, are there any impediments? So maybe some people just took this one question technically too serious and said, number 1, what have I done since yesterday? Number 2, what will I achieve until tomorrow? Number 3, what impediments do I face now? There you go, off. And maybe these questions have, or some people are taking this practice too serious and say, okay, well, from that historical misunderstanding, I understand that the Daily Scrum is about these 3 things. And number 3 is, are there impediments? Now, taking the thing of taking things too serious, I would like to go to the to the other question. Is it the Scrum Master who has to share their screen? I have been working with teams who had the conversation, a particular conversation, is the Scrum Master responsible of inviting to all team meetings? And we ended up in endless discussions if it's the Scrum Master's or the product owner's responsibility to invite to this or that meeting. To answer it from a very different perspective, Lauren, Fia, Regina, and I, we met just before the webinar 20 minutes earlier, had a quick coffee with each other, we're talking to each other, and we ended up with, by the way, someone should share their screen, who's going to do it? It doesn't care. It doesn't matter if it's Regina sharing their screen, if it's Lauren sharing her screen, if it's Sophia sharing her screen, as long as the screen is shared by someone. So if I'm saying now, yes, the Scrum Master should share their screen, I'm quite afraid that someone could go out into their team and say, by the way, I have learned that it is the Scrum Master who should share the screen. The team, it is the developers who should synchronize. So technically it should be the developers sharing their screen if this is important, or if this transparency is important for the conversation. And for God's sake, if nobody is doing it, but the Scrum Master thinks that it would be helpful, then of course the Scrum Master is entitled to do the same thing as well. But I would not go out and say, by the way, Regina, it is your responsibility and you have to share this screen because you're the Scrum Master. That's not like how the team should work. And this is not this kind of, okay, let's do this together.
Thank you. We're getting to the end of the session today. It's, as usual, a pity that time is running out because we still have some good questions, but I would like maybe for you, Lothar and Regina, still to share your best tips and tricks for the day, for the Daily Scrum, what to do and maybe what to not do, and maybe what to try now also, since many still are working in remote sessions. It would be a cool ending to the session today.
So My big tip is focus on the outcomes, focus on goals, right? The tasks to achieve them will fall into place. If everybody knows what their reason for being is, their reason for coming together to do this work together is, whether it is in a team goal, but also leading into a sprint goal, let people think about their goals, the outcomes, the goals of the team, the goals of the sprint. It gets people outside of the detail. And when people focus on the goals, there are many, many ways to get to the goal, right? There are many, many ways. If you're going from here to Pretoria, which is a city about 50 kilometers from Johannesburg, there are many, many roads, right? Depends what goal you want to go faster, you want to go slower, you want less traffic, you don't want to pay toll fees, whatever the case is. The goal is to get to Pretoria. There are many ways to get there. Focus on the goal. There are many ways to achieve it.
Lothar, do you have any tips and tricks?
I'm just struggling because I'm searching for the right video. We had a conversation yesterday when Regina and I prepared this for the webinar. I think there are a couple of videos that you would find in YouTube, which are named Daily Scrum from Hell or something. There is not this one thing where I would say you have definitely to do that, but you will find a lot of videos that jeopardize simply the daily scrum, where the manager is coming in and saying, Fia, what have you done since yesterday? What are you doing till tomorrow? Anything to do? Okay, well, next one, Regina. There is not that one thing where I would say, please do this or that, but I would have a look on these jeopardizing videos that just like, make fun out of the daily scrums. Have a look on that and see if there is any pattern that looks a little familiar to you or to one or the other team. Maybe this is something, or like some good step forward to say, by the way, I've seen something in this comedy video and we're doing it. Do we think that that's the right thing, or should we have a conversation about it? Yeah.
Thank you. We also have this really, really cool new e-learning about facilitating Scrum that Lauren is going to share with you also today. If you are interested to get some more tips and tricks, we absolutely recommend to you this e-learning. Another very cool place to also meet peers and Agilists is to join our community. It's free, and there you can also continue the discussions with our coaches and with other people about the Daily Scrum or about anything else. So I encourage you to also sign up to that. Lauren shared with you also links with newsletters, webinars, websites, and all of this. So just get in touch also with our offices if there's something that we can help you with, or if you want to talk about the Daily Scrum, for example, with one of our coaches, we are happy to help you and set up those calls. And I'm very, very thankful for all the questions. It was really, really nice that you were so active today. And a big, big thanks to Regina and Lothar for the presentation today. You guys did great. We are going to have a webinar again next month. We are going to post on social media when that's up and running so that you can also join that session. This recording will be out in a few days also on social media, so feel free to share it around with people who missed the live session. And yeah, I hope to see you next time again, and let's see who of the coaches I will have joining in that session. Thanks for today. Have a nice end to the week, and hope your day will be fantastic. And enjoy the Daily Scrum whenever it's coming, if it's later today or tomorrow or in the morning or whenever. Thank you.